About some sleepers that you could potentially pick up here before week one. If you're looking at your, picking up sleepers in week one is kind of a weird thing, right? Because you just drafted your team. You probably should have drafted a team of guys that you feel confident going with here in week one. But if you're looking at your roster right now and you're nervous about a particular position or something, I'm going to just throw some names out there of guys that, might have some high ceilings or high floors that you could plug in this week, and it could help you get a dub in that week one. That everybody wants a dub. Now the first guy I'm going to talk about, this is going to sound like a homer opinion by me, but hear me out here. I like Devante Parker. Devante Parker, freak athlete, 6'3", 220. He's the prototypical guy that you want to draft as wide receiver. If you just looked at his silhouette, you're like, yeah, and you looked at his athletics and stuff, his 40-time vert, all that stuff, you'd be like, yeah, that's a guy that you want. But he hasn't been able to really make it work in the NFL to this point. But, he hasn't had a quarterback who's like a real gunslinger who really is, has shown that they're adept at using these outside targets, highly athletic outside targets. Tannehill wasn't that guy. Cutler was way over the hill. Matt Moore, these guys weren't the guys. And Fitzpatrick, it's not like Fitzpatrick is this legendary quarterback, but Fitzpatrick has shown that he's capable of utilizing these outside wide receivers and getting them the ball and giving them chances to contribute, as particularly in a fantasy football type of forum. In real football, if you look at it, Fitzpatrick's not the best player, but from a fantasy perspective, unless he's throwing 5 picks, which is about half the time, he's throwing like 5 touchdowns. The guy, he slings it. And I think he's going to be able to make better use of Devante Parker than anybody has been able to so far in Parker's career. And Devante Parker, on all these percentages are going to be NFL.com. I'll state that now. Devante Parker's only owned in 1.6% of fantasy football leagues. So I think in a standard format, if you're looking for a boom player to put in your flex, if you're in a 12 or 14 team league and you just don't feel good about who you got in your flex or at your wide receiver 2, and you're looking at your opponent and they just got a stacked team and you feel like you need some upside to try to keep up with your opponent, I think Devante Parker's a guy who could have a huge boom here in the first couple of weeks. As long as Fitzpatrick is playing, I think Devante Parker has a chance at booming every week. Now we're playing the Ravens in week 1. That's a really tough matchup. So, that might be something worth also considering, that, maybe the matchup is just not favorable and you might want to hold it for a couple of weeks and wait till, Fitzpatrick has a little bit more of a favorable matchup. Because like I said, I think as long as Fitzpatrick's in the lineup, Devante Parker has a pretty high ceiling. Low floor, high ceiling. Now, another guy that is owned in just 12.2% of fantasy football leagues that I think is going to be good, really good this year, is Anthony Miller. Anthony Miller of the Chicago Bears. I think he could finish the season as the Bears' number 1 wide receiver. I think he's probably more athletically talented than Allen Robinson. And Allen Robinson's owned in 99% of fantasy football leagues compared to just 12% for Anthony Miller. The upside of Miller, I think, is probably higher. His floor is lower. And I don't know if I trust Trubisky all the way. I like Trubisky's upside, and I think that he might be able to take a step forward. I think there's a decent chance he can take a step forward and be dynamic this year. And if he does, I think Anthony Miller is going to be a key weapon for him. So Anthony Miller is a guy that I would, if he's only owned in 12% of the leagues, he's worth picking up and stashing. He is he's one of those guys that, you can stash for the future. And it's not like stashing like a Malcolm Brown, like that type of Malcolm Brown or Chase Edmonds, that handcuff type of stash, where you're depending on somebody getting injured in order for them, for the handcuff to be useful. Anthony Miller is just, if Trubisky can get his game going, boom, Anthony Miller's good. So that's what it's contingent upon. It's not contingent upon an injury. It's contingent upon a player who is healthy being able to perform. And I like Trubisky's chances of being able to take a step forward this year. That's why I like the Bears so much. So in PPR format, a wide receiver that I would really like to look at is Adam Humphries. Humphries was pretty dynamic towards the end of last year with Tampa as a PPR guy. He's going to be playing that slot in Tennessee. And Tennessee, Marcus Mariota, even if Ryan Tannehill's playing at quarterback, these guys aren't really great at throwing to the outside. They haven't shown an ability at, a really high NFL ability to be able to utilize outside weapons. Delaney Walker's coming back. Delaney Walker might be, a good safety blanket for Marcus Mariota. But Delaney Walker's getting a little bit older. So I think Adam Humphries might be the new safety blanket for Marcus Mariota or Ryan Tannehill. Tannehill loves to throw underneath too. Think about how successful Jarvis Landry was when he was in Miami, getting over 100 receptions every year. These guys, Tannehill and Mariota are both great at dumping it down. And I think Humphries could be a PPR, just a really, really good high floor PPR play week in and week out. He's owned in only 11% of leagues. So, I mean, if you're in a PPR league, go out and get him. If you're not in a PPR league, I don't like him because I think he's dependent on the catching volume. He's going to be a 5, 6, 7 reception a game kind of guy. That's how he's going to be successful in fantasy football. So in regular formats, I would stay away. But if you're in a PPR and you're looking for a high floor type of guy, I think Adam Humphries is a guy to go out. He's available in 88% of the leagues on NFL.com. So go out and get him. And I think at tight end, if you didn't get one of the top 5 guys, I really think that you need to get a guy with high upside. And I think Eifert has way more upside than Eric Ebron, Jack Doyle, Greg Olsen, Jason Witten, even a more upside than Austin Hooper, Trey Burton. There's all those guys. Might have a little bit better of floors, but the upside with Eifert is a top 5, top 6, top 7 tight end at worst. He's a really dynamic player out there on the field. Andy Dalton likes to use him. If he can stay healthy, Tyler Eifert's a good play. And guess what? Tyler Eifert's healthy week 1. So if you're not confident at your tight end, if you have somebody like Witten or Olsen or somebody like that, I would go out and get Eifert. I think he's got the higher ceiling. And until he gets injured, I think he's going to be a weekly good play at the tight end position. Now, if you have one of the top guys, like Hunter Henry, O.J. Howard, Ertz, Kittle, Kelsey, Evan Ingram, those top 6 guys rather, then don't worry about it. But if you have anybody else, I think Eifert is worth a start, potentially. Now, Justin Jackson, for some reason, he's only owned in 15% of leagues on NFL.com. If you remember towards the end of last year, when Melvin Gordon was gone, Justin Jackson was getting the majority of the early down work, and he was very consistent and successful there. I think Austin Eckler is going to be locked into the third down role if it's Melvin Gordon or if it's Justin Jackson, but he'll get a little bit of that first and second down work, a little bit extra of that first and second down work if it is Justin Jackson instead of Melvin Gordon. If it's Melvin Gordon, he's basically just getting the third down work with maybe a change of pace once in a while. With Justin Jackson, he's going to get all the third down work and probably a little bit extra reps in the change of pace role on first and second down, but Justin Jackson is still probably going to get the majority of the reps there. That's a high octane offense with an elite quarterback, elite wide receivers. Mike Williams is a guy who could catch 12 touchdowns. Keenan Allen, one of the highest reception rates of any receiver in the NFL. Hunter Henry, he's going to be a beast at tight end this year. I think he's going to be a breakout tight end of the year, the breakout tight end of the year. So, Justin Jackson is potentially like an RB2 here. Like, he's going to finish in the top 24 running backs, I feel like, pretty consistently until Melvin Gordon comes back. If Melvin Gordon ever comes back, he might not ever come back. Apparently, the Chargers have suspended contract negotiations with him, and they're letting him seek a trade. So, I mean, at this point, I don't think Gordon is coming back. So Justin Jackson is literally an RB2 sitting out there. He's only owned in 15% of leagues. So in 85% of leagues on NFL.com, you could just go out and pick up an RB2. If you have Darwin Thompson, drop Darwin Thompson. He's with LaShawn McCoy going into Kansas City. He's now the third fiddle. There's a lot of guys that you should be dropping to pick up Justin Jackson. And that's like not just a week one sleeper. That's a season-long sleeper. That's a guy that could win you a championship. Now, I'm not overstating that. That's for real. Now, looking at quarterbacks, it gets a little bit ridiculous with how much these quarterbacks are owned. So many people draft 2 quarterbacks, and it doesn't make any sense. The quarterbacks are owned in so many more, such a higher percentage of leagues than these other players that I'm going to talk about. But let's start with Mitch Trubisky. He's owned in 39% of leagues, high percentage. I wanted to pick quarterbacks that were owned in lesser percentages, but people just have 2 quarterbacks apparently in majority of leagues. I'm not sure why, but a lot of people must have 2 quarterbacks based on how much some of these quarterbacks are owned around NFL.com. So Trubisky is owned in 39%. Like I said, he's got serious rushing upside, and he's got just an insane plethora of playmakers around him. He's a guy that he could win you a championship for sure. And he was a dude that you could have drafted so late in the draft, and you could have stocked up on so many other positions. I just can't believe that so many quarterbacks are owned because they're such a dime a dozen. But Trubisky, I love this week. Week 1, Packers D improved, but not great. Trubisky's got serious rushing upside. He could be easily good for 4 points a game just in rushing. And then he's got all those talented receivers. Robinson, last year he was coming off the ACL, so I'm expecting him to take a step forward this year. And then, like I said, I think Anthony Miller is going to finish as the wide receiver 1 on the team at the end of the year. Tariq Cohen, just an absolute gadget beast of a player that you can dump down to. He's going to, you throw a 5-yard pass and he runs 80 yards for a touchdown, and it's like, oh, there's a 7-point play for my quarterback on a 5-yard dump off. So Trubisky, and then David Montgomery is going to be interesting. I like Trubisky a lot this year. He's a guy, if you see him on the waiver wire, he could be worth picking up. I think he's going to probably finish in the top 12 quarterbacks this week. So, I mean, if you've got a more middling quarterback, Trubisky could be a guy worth going after. And then here's the next quarterback I'm going to talk about, Jimmy Garoppolo, who is somehow he is owned in 45% of leagues. Like, Jimmy Garoppolo is owned in 45% of leagues, and Justin Jackson's only owned in 15% of leagues. People don't understand how to play fantasy football. If Jimmy Garoppolo is available and you need a quarterback this week, Jimmy G could do it for you. A bit of a very, very favorable matchup against just a disastrous Tampa Bay defense. And Tampa's going to have a dynamic offense, and San Fran's got a bad defense. So this is going to be a shootout of a game. I love Winston, like I said, all year. Jimmy G, if he's available, this is going to be a shootout, and I like him as a high upside play this week. If you feel like you need an upside play, I like Jimmy Garoppolo. I think he's going to finish, I bet a lot of people are probably starting Russell Wilson over Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo is, I would almost guarantee, going to outscore Russell Wilson here in week 1. The only apprehension I have from basically guaranteeing that is the fact that Jimmy's coming off of the ACL. Who knows how he's going to look in week 1, So I'm a little bit apprehensive to say that he will for sure be better than like a Russell Wilson, but I think he'll probably be better than Russell Wilson. He'll probably be better than Carson Wentz. He's going to probably be a top 8, 9 quarterback this week. A top 10 quarterback this week. I haven't looked exactly at all the rankings, but I like his upside this week. I think against a terrible defense in what's going to be a shootout of a game, and he's got playmakers around him. I love Jimmy G this week. Somehow he's owned in 45% of the leagues, but like I said, if you got a Russell Wilson or somebody like that playing instead, Russell Wilson, Carson Wentz, if you got one of those guys playing instead, I would prefer to go with Jimmy Garoppolo. I might be in the minority here, but I think that next week I'm going to be able to boast that I was right about that. And honorable mention, I'm going to say Dak Prescott. Now, he's owned in just another absurd amount of fantasy leagues. I think he's owned in like over 80% of fantasy leagues, which I can't believe that. I thought he was a sleeper that you'd probably be able to grab off the waiver wire for week 1 to 3, where he's got just cakewalk matchups for the first 3 weeks of the season. So if you're a person who is okay with streaming quarterbacks, or you're not sure, you don't like maybe your matchups early on in the season or something, Dak Prescott is a phenomenal play for the first 3 weeks of the season. Zeke or no Zeke, I really think he's going to finish as a QB1 every week for the first 3 weeks of the season. So just check your waiver wire. If Dak Prescott's out there, maybe go ahead and pick him up. Flip him after week 3, when his value is at his highest. Try to trade him off, or just freaking drop him for somebody else. And so that's it for my fantasy football week 1 sleepers.